Florida. For a century, the name itself has been more than a place. It has been a global brand, a masterfully crafted and relentlessly marketed promise of paradise. The Sunshine State, a land of endless summer, of swaying palm trees that whisper in the warm, salt-laced breeze, of crystalline springs and turquoise waters that seem to wash away the worries of the world. It is the world's playground, a meticulously engineered fantasy land where the harsh, gray realities of life are meant to melt away under the warm, benevolent, and ever-present sun. It is the promise of escape, of adventure, of rejuvenation, of memories that will last a lifetime. This promise, this powerful and seductive myth, built a global empire, a colossal $100 billion a year tourism industry that became the undisputed, turbocharged engine of the state's modern economy. It fueled the construction of the world's most famous theme parks, glittering luxury resorts, and entire sprawling coastal communities that seemed to arise from the mangroves and swampland as if by magic. It created millions of jobs, from the legions of housekeepers who turned down the beds in five-star hotels to the weathered fishing captains who guided tourists to their trophy catch. The entire economic, political, and social structure of modern Florida was built on the bedrock of this single, seemingly inexhaustible resource: the irresistible allure of its natural beauty and the manufactured perfection of its commercialized fun. But in 2025, that bedrock is cracking. The promise is broken. The very foundations of Florida's tourism empire are being systematically, and in some cases, deliberately, dismantled. A toxic convergence of an accelerating environmental catastrophe, soaring unsustainable costs, and a divisive, alienating political climate is beginning to repel the very visitors the state has spent a century and billions of dollars cultivating. The paradise is becoming a paradox, a place where the dream of a perfect vacation is colliding with a harsh, often ugly, and increasingly unavoidable reality.
This is not a story you will see on the Visit Florida commercials with their sun-drenched models and carefully curated smiles. This is the story happening just beneath the surface of the sparkling water, the story whispered in the half-empty restaurants and the struggling family-owned seaside motels. This is the story of how Florida just killed its $100 billion tourism empire. The paradise lost, an ecosystem in collapse. The ultimate currency of Florida tourism has always been its extraordinary, God-given natural beauty. The pristine, sugar sand beaches, the vibrant, life-filled coral reefs, the teeming brackish estuaries that serve as the nurseries of the sea. These were not just amenities on a checklist, they were the product itself. But that product is now being systematically destroyed, and the state's long-simmering environmental crisis has metastasized into its greatest and most immediate economic threat. The most visible and terrifying symptom of this collapse is the plague of toxic algae blooms that now choke the state's iconic waterways with alarming, predictable regularity. In the once pristine, famously biodiverse waters of the Indian River Lagoon, on the Atlantic coast, and in the vital estuaries of southwest Florida around Fort Myers and Sanibel Island, a gruesome, guacamole-thick sludge of blue-green algae, scientifically known as cyanobacteria, now blooms for months at a time. This toxic soup is fueled by decades of unchecked nutrient pollution, a poisonous cocktail of phosphorus and nitrogen from agricultural runoff from the sugar fields around Lake Okeechobee, from leaky, outdated septic systems in sprawling coastal developments, and from the fertilizer-rich stormwater that pours off of millions of manicured suburban lawns. This is not just an eyesore, it is a profound public health nightmare. These blooms release powerful neurotoxins into the air, potent poisons that can cause severe respiratory distress, skin rashes, and long-term neurological symptoms in residents and tourists alike. They create vast, oxygen-depleted dead zones on the water's floor, suffocating and killing off the vital seagrass beds that are the primary food source for manatees and the habitat for countless species of fish. The result is a cascade of death, causing catastrophic fish kills that leave thousands of tons of rotting marine life to wash up on the shores. creating a stench that is unbearable and a sight that is apocalyptic. A day at the beach has been replaced by a public health advisory.
Simultaneously, the Gulf of Mexico is being ravaged by increasingly severe and long-lasting outbreaks of red tide, a naturally occurring algae that, when supercharged by the same nutrient pollution flowing from the land, becomes a toxic plague. It turns the normally clear blue-green water a murky rust-colored brown and releases a potent paralytic toxin that attacks the nervous systems of marine life. It kills dolphins, manatees, sea turtles, and millions upon millions of fish, their lifeless bodies lining the very beaches that tourists once flocked to for their pristine beauty. The smell is unbearable, a visceral assault on the senses. The sight is apocalyptic. The very act of breathing the air near a red tide outbreak can cause coughing, sneezing, and severe respiratory irritation. Beneath the waves, another, quieter catastrophe is unfolding. Florida is home to the only barrier coral reef in the continental United States, a fragile, magnificent, and incredibly complex ecosystem that was once a global destination for snorkelers and divers. But that reef is now in a state of terminal decline. A deadly combination of rising ocean temperatures, which cause catastrophic bleaching events, where the coral expels its life-giving algae, and the rapid spread of a mysterious and highly lethal coral disease known as stony coral tissue loss disease, has wiped out up to 90% of the reef's living coral in some areas. The vibrant, colorful, three-dimensional underwater world that once defined the Florida Keys is turning into a barren, gray, and desolate graveyard. This is not a distant future threat. It is a present and escalating reality. Tourists are now canceling their vacations, not because of a passing storm, but because the very beaches and waters they came to enjoy have become toxic and dangerous. The fishing charters, once a cornerstone of the coastal economy, are returning to the docks with empty coolers and disappointed clients. The dive shops and eco-tour operators are going out of business. The natural capital that was the foundation of Florida's $100 billion tourism empire is being liquidated at an alarming rate. And the state's political leadership has, for the most part, watched it happen with a mixture of willful denial and calculated indifference. The price of paradise, a vacation for the 1%. For decades, a Florida vacation was an accessible, almost sacred part of the American middle-class dream. It was a place where a family from Ohio or Michigan could pack up the station wagon, drive down I-75 for 2 days, and afford a week in a modest, clean motel on the beach, creating memories that would last a lifetime. That Florida is gone. It has become a relic, a sepia-toned memory from a more egalitarian era.
The same speculative frenzy that has decimated the local housing market has also transformed the cost of a simple vacation into a luxury commodity. The mom-and-pop motels that once lined the state's coastal highways with their quirky neon signs and their simple, unpretentious charm have been systematically bought up by private equity firms and faceless real estate developers. They are either torn down and replaced with gleaming, exclusive, luxury condominium towers, or they are gutted and converted into high-end, minimalist boutique hotels with nightly rates that are laughably out of reach for the average American family. The cost of a hotel room in major tourist destinations like Miami Beach, Orlando, and the Florida Keys has skyrocketed, often exceeding $500 or $600 a night for a standard room during peak season. The rise of short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and VRBO, once touted as a more affordable, live-like-a-local alternative, has only exacerbated the problem. In many coastal communities, a huge portion of the available housing stock has been converted into full-time, investor-owned vacation rentals. This has not only driven up the cost of a rental for tourists to levels that often exceed that of a hotel, but it has also decimated the supply of affordable housing for the local workforce, creating the very labor crisis we will explore later. But it's not just the cost of lodging. The entire tourism experience in Florida has been engineered for maximum revenue extraction.
The hidden, mandatory resort fees that hotels tack onto the bill, the exorbitant parking fees, the price of a simple meal at a tourist-trap restaurant, the ever-escalating cost of a single-day ticket to a theme park, all have been relentlessly ratcheted up as massive, publicly traded corporations seek to extract every last possible dollar from a captive audience. The result is a profound and fundamental shift in the very demographics of Florida tourism. The middle-class family is being systematically priced out, replaced by a more affluent, often international clientele. Florida is rapidly transitioning from America's playground to a luxury destination for the global elite, a high-end brand that is leaving its traditional loyal customer base behind. The message, whether intentional or not, is becoming increasingly clear. If you are not wealthy, you are no longer welcome. The wage crisis, an empire built on low-wage labor. The glittering, sun-drenched facade of Florida's tourism empire has always been built on a vast and often invisible army of low-wage workers. The housekeepers who meticulously clean the thousands of hotel rooms, the line cooks who toil in the sweltering heat of the resort kitchens, the front desk clerks who greet guests with a weary but professional smile, the theme park attendants who operate the rides and manage the crowds. These are the people who create the magic, who work tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the fantasy of a perfect, frictionless vacation remains intact. But they are being crushed by the very system they uphold.
Florida's economy is, and has always been, a low-wage economy. The state's minimum wage remains one of the lowest in the country, and a huge portion of its tourism jobs pay at or just above that level, with little to no benefits, no paid sick leave, and no job security. For decades, this model was sustainable, albeit precariously, because the low wages were, in theory, offset by a low cost of living. But that equilibrium has been shattered. The explosion in housing and insurance costs has created an existential crisis for the state's service workers. They are now trapped in an impossible, soul-crushing situation. They cannot afford to live in the communities where they work. They are forced into ever longer, more expensive commutes, a daily grind that leaves them with less time for their families and less money in their pockets. The result is a chronic and worsening labor shortage in the very industry that is the lifeblood of the state. Hotels are understaffed, forced to leave entire floors of rooms empty because they don't have enough housekeeping staff. Restaurants are forced to close for lunch or on certain days of the week because they can't find enough cooks and servers. And the quality of service, once a hallmark of the Florida experience, is beginning to visibly and at times dramatically decline. Tourists who are paying luxury prices are increasingly being met with a level of service that reflects a demoralized, underpaid, and utterly exhausted workforce. The magic is fading, and the gears of the great tourism machine are beginning to grind to a halt, not because of a lack of demand, but because of a lack of people who can afford to do the work. The culture war casualty, a state of hostility. In recent years, Florida's political leadership has embarked on a highly publicized and deeply divisive series of culture wars. From new laws restricting education on topics of race and gender to a high-profile, punitive battle with one of its largest and most iconic employers, the state has actively and deliberately cultivated a new national image, one that is often perceived as hostile, intolerant, and unwelcoming. While this strategy may have political benefits for some, it is beginning to have devastating economic consequences for the tourism industry. Major national conferences and conventions, which bring millions of dollars in revenue to cities like Orlando and Miami, have begun to publicly cancel their events, citing the state's hostile political climate. National civil rights organizations have issued formal travel advisories, warning certain groups that Florida may not be a safe or welcoming place for them to visit. This is a new and dangerous front in the battle for the tourist dollar. For decades, Florida's brand was deliberately apolitical. It was simply about sunshine and fun, a neutral ground where Americans of all backgrounds could come to relax and escape. But the state's leadership has made a calculated decision to rebrand it as the front line of a national culture war. The long-term economic impact of this strategy is still unknown, but the early signs are alarming. A state that depends on its image as a welcoming, family-friendly destination cannot afford to be seen as a place of intolerance and division.
The political battles being fought in the halls of Tallahassee are now spilling over into the boardrooms of national associations and the travel plans of ordinary families across the country and around the world, turning the state's greatest asset, its universal appeal, into a potential self-inflicted liability.
The insurance implosion, a market in freefall. The crisis in Florida's property insurance market is not just a problem for homeowners. It is a systemic threat to the entire tourism economy. The state's hotels, resorts, and theme parks are not immune to the same forces that are crushing individual families. They too are facing astronomical increases in their insurance premiums, a cost that is inevitably passed on to the consumer in the form of higher room rates and ticket prices. But the problem runs even deeper. The inability to secure affordable, reliable insurance is beginning to spook the very financial institutions that underwrite the state's tourism development. Banks are becoming increasingly hesitant to issue loans for new hotel construction or for the renovation of existing properties in high-risk coastal areas. The entire engine of tourism growth, which depends on a constant cycle of investment and development, is beginning to seize up. The insurance crisis is no longer just a story about individual hardship. It is a story about a loss of confidence in the very future of the state's built environment. A crisis that threatens to bring the construction cranes and the economic growth they represent to a grinding halt. The vanishing beaches, a war against nature. Florida's beaches are its most valuable and iconic asset, but they are also a fragile and ephemeral resource, locked in a constant, losing battle with the forces of erosion. For decades, the state has waged a costly and ultimately futile war to keep its beaches in place, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on beach renourishment projects, a process that involves dredging sand from offshore and pumping it back on to the eroding shoreline. But this is a temporary and increasingly unsustainable solution. As sea levels rise and storms become more powerful, the rate of erosion is accelerating and the cost of these projects is skyrocketing. The sand itself, once thought to be an inexhaustible resource, is becoming scarce. The state is now facing the unthinkable prospect of a future where it can no longer afford to maintain its own coastline. A future of shrinking beaches, of crumbling seawalls, and of luxury hotels and condominiums slowly being reclaimed by the sea. The very image that has defined Florida in the global imagination, the wide, white sand beach, is becoming a managed illusion, a temporary artifice that is becoming harder and harder to sustain. The traffic nightmare, a paradise gridlocked. The promise of a relaxed, carefree Florida lifestyle is hard to find when you're spending hours a day trapped in a car. The state's infrastructure, particularly its road network, has been completely overwhelmed by its explosive, unplanned growth. In every major tourist corridor, from the drive into the Florida Keys to the congested arteries surrounding Orlando's theme parks, visitors are met with a daily nightmare of gridlock. This is not just an inconvenience, it is a significant deterrent to tourism. Families who come to Florida for a relaxing vacation are instead finding themselves stressed, frustrated, and losing precious hours of their trip to traffic. The state's car-dependent culture, with its lack of viable public transportation options, means that there is no escape. The very act of getting from the airport to the hotel or from the hotel to the beach has become a source of anxiety, chipping away at the very sense of escape and relaxation that people come to Florida to find. The authenticity crisis, a state of strangers. As Florida's tourism industry has become more corporate, more consolidated, and more expensive, it has begun to suffer from a crisis of authenticity. The unique, quirky, and independent businesses that once gave the state its character, the family-owned seafood shacks, the kitschy roadside attractions, the independent art galleries, are being systematically replaced by a bland, homogeneous landscape of national chains and formulaic corporate experiences. Tourists are increasingly finding that a vacation in Florida feels indistinguishable from a vacation anywhere else in the country.
The same chain restaurants, the same souvenir shops, the same generic hotel brands. The very sense of place, of a unique and vibrant local culture, is being eroded. For a new generation of travelers who are increasingly seeking out authentic local experiences, this is a significant turnoff. The magic of discovering a hidden gem, of feeling like you stumbled upon something real and unique, is being lost in a sea of corporate sameness.
The political fallout, a brand tarnished. The political battles being waged in Florida are no longer a niche concern for policy walks. They have become a major and often negative part of the state's national and international brand. The constant stream of controversial headlines, the high-profile fights with major corporations, and the perception of a state that is becoming increasingly intolerant and divisive are beginning to have a real and measurable impact on tourism. It's not just about canceled conventions. It's about the individual families who are now thinking twice about whether Florida is a place that aligns with their values. It's about the international tourists who are being warned by their own governments about the state's political climate. It's about the erosion of the state's most powerful marketing tool, its image as a place of universal, apolitical fun. The political choices being made in Tallahassee are no longer just a matter of governance, they're a matter of brand management, and right now, the brand is being damaged. The workers' revolt, an empire without a foundation. Perhaps the most immediate and existential threat to Florida's tourism empire is a simple one. It is running out of workers. The state's low-wage, high-cost model has become utterly unsustainable. The very people who are needed to clean the hotel rooms, cook the food, and operate the theme park rides can no longer afford to live in the state. They are leaving in droves, seeking a better life in states with a lower cost of living and higher wages. This has created a chronic and worsening labor shortage that is beginning to cripple the tourism industry. Hotels are being forced to leave rooms empty because they don't have enough housekeeping staff. Restaurants are cutting their hours because they can't find enough cooks and servers. And the quality of the tourist experience is inevitably suffering as a result. This is the final, fatal paradox of the Florida model. A state that has built a $100 billion empire on the promise of a luxury experience for its visitors has created a reality of profound hardship for its workers. And now, that empire is beginning to crumble, not because of a lack of tourists, but because of a lack of people who can afford to serve them. The foundation of the entire system is cracking, and without a dramatic and fundamental shift in its approach to wages, housing, and the very value of its workers, the Magic Kingdom is in danger of becoming a ghost town. The final reckoning. So, what does this all mean? It means that the Florida of the postcards, the Florida of the national imagination, is a dangerous and seductive oversimplification. It is a state of profound and often brutal contradictions. It is a land of incredible, breathtaking natural beauty that is being systematically, and in some cases deliberately, poisoned by its own policies. It is a low-tax haven that is becoming crushingly unaffordable for the middle class. It is a booming economy that is creating a new and permanent class of working poor. To move to Florida in 2025 is to step into this paradox. It is to accept a series of high-stakes, life-altering gambles. A gamble on the housing market, a gamble on the insurance market, a gamble on the climate, and a gamble on the very future of the American dream. The promise of an easy life in the sun has been replaced by the reality of a hard-fought daily battle for survival in a state where the costs are hidden and the risks are rising every single day. This is not to say that a good life is impossible in Florida. For the independently wealthy, for the remote worker with a six-figure salary from a job in another state, for the retiree who has sold an expensive home in the Northeast and can buy with cash, Florida can still be a paradise. But for the average American family, for the teacher, the nurse, the construction worker, the hospitality worker, the very people who make the state function, the dream is becoming a trap. The great unraveling of Florida is a warning. It is a glimpse into a future where the fundamental components of a stable life, a secure home, a decent wage, a sense of community, A healthy environment are no longer rights to be earned through hard work, but privileges to be purchased by a shrinking and increasingly isolated elite. The story of Florida is the story of America in microcosm, a story of a promise that is being broken, one unaffordable home, one uninsurable risk, one shattered dream at a time. The sunshine is still here, but in its harsh, unrelenting, and unforgiving glare, the cracks in the foundation are becoming impossible